Hello, students. So today I was helping my son clean his room, and I came across a book that is my favorite book ever to read to third grade, and I always read it every spring to you guys, to all my students. And I was pretty sad when I looked at it because I thought, oh, I'm not going to get to read it. They're not going to get to hear this story, and it's amazing. So I was thinking, I was like, you know what? I am going to record myself reading it, and then I'm going to share it with you so that you can hear it and anybody else who wants to hear it. So my favorite book for third grade is called The Miraculous Journey of Edward Tulane, and it is by Kate D. Camillo. So this is a 4.4. But you can go ahead and take an AR test on it if you're going to sit here and listen to me read it. It's amazing. I'm going to start. I'll read a couple chapters a day and post them. I'll try to keep it at about 10 minutes. That way you can do it in small sections. Okay, so this is chapter 1. And there are some pictures, but not a lot. Once in a house on Egypt Street, there lived a rabbit who was made almost entirely of china. He had china arms and china legs, china paws and a china head, a china torso and a china nose. His arms and legs were jointed and joined by wire so that his china elbows and china knees could be bent, giving him much freedom of movement. Now I'm going to pause every once in a while and let you think about a couple things and maybe give you some information. So when it says that he's made of china, that doesn't mean that I'm talking about the country China. What I'm talking about is like a porcelain, kind of a glass thing. Some people might have china at their house that they eat off of, and it's like dishes and plates. So china is something that is very fragile. It's more like glass or porcelain, kind of like how your dishes are, the ones that aren't plastic. So you can think about something like that. And china, the actual material is expensive. So this is a very special rabbit. His ears were made of real rabbit fur, and beneath the fur there were strong bendable wires which allowed the ears to be arranged into poses that reflected the rabbit's mood: jaunty, tired, and full of anew. His tail too was made of real rabbit fur, and his was real, fluffy, and soft, and well shaped. This rabbit's name was Edward Tulane, and he was tall. He measured almost 3 feet from the tip of his ears to the tip of his feet. His eyes were painted a penetrating and intelligent blue. In all, Edward Tulane felt himself to be an exceptional specimen. Only his whiskers gave him pause. They were long and elegant, as they should be, but they were of an uncertain origin. Edward felt quite strongly that they were not the whiskers of a rabbit. Whom the whiskers had belonged to initially, what an unsavory animal, was a question that Edward could not bear to consider for too long, so he did not. He preferred, as a rule, not to think of unpleasant thoughts. Edward's mistress was a 10-year-old dark-haired girl named Abilene Tulane, who thought almost as highly of Edward as Edward thought of himself. Each morning, after she dressed herself for school, Abilene dressed Edward. So Edward is a china rabbit, and the girl that owns him, her name is Abilene, and she loves Edward as much as Edward loves himself. The china rabbit was in possession of an extraordinary wardrobe composed of handmade silk suits, custom shoes fashioned from the finest leather and designed specifically for his rabbit feet, and a wide array of hats equipped with holes so that they could fit easily over Edward's large and expressive ears. Each pair of well-cut pants had a small pocket for Edward's gold pocket watch. Abilene wound this watch for him each morning. "Now, Edward," she said to him after she was done winding the watch, "when the big hand is on the 12 and the little hand is on the 3, I will come home to you." So think about that. The big hand's on the 12 and the little hand's on the 3. You should be thinking to yourself, 3 o'clock. She placed Edward on a chair in the dining room and positioned the chair so that Edward was looking out at the window and could see the path that led up to the Tulane front door. Abilene balanced the watch on his left leg. She kissed the tips of his ears, and then she left, and Edward spent the day staring out at Egypt Street, listening to the tick of his watch and waiting. Of all the seasons of the year, the rabbit most preferred winter, for the sun set early then, and the dining room windows became dark, and Edward could see his own reflection in the glass. And what a reflection it was! What an elegant figure he cut! Edward never ceased to be amazed at his own fineness. In the evening, Edward sat at the dining room table with the other members of the Tulane family, Abilene, her mother and father, and Abilene's grandmother, who was called Pellegrina. True, Edward's ears barely cleared the top of the table, and true, he also spent the duration of the meal staring straight ahead at nothing but the bright and blinding white of the tablecloth. But he was there, a rabbit, at the table. Abilene's parents found it charming that Abilene considered Edward real, and that she sometimes requested that a phrase or a story might be repeated had Edward not heard it. So I'm going to pause for a minute here. Edward is this China rabbit, as we've said, and he is part of the family. Abilene really loves him and takes care of him, and she dresses him every day, and she brings him to the dinner table, and she thinks that he is real, and she talks to him like she is real, okay? Papa, Abilene would say, I'm afraid that Edward didn't catch that last bit. Abilene's father would then turn in the direction of Edward's ears and speak slowly, repeating what he had just said for the benefit of the China rabbit. Edward pretended, out of courtesy to Abilene, to listen, but in truth, he was not very interested in what people had to say, and also, he did not care for Abilene's parents and their condescending manner toward him. All adults, in fact, condescended to him. Only Abilene's grandmother spoke to him as Abilene did, as one equal to another. Pellegrina was very old. She had a large, sharp nose and bright black eyes that shone like dark stars. It was Pellegrina who was responsible for Edward's existence. It was she who had commissioned his making, she who had ordered his silk suits and his pocket watch, his jaunty hats and his bendable ears, his fine leather shoes and his jointed arms and legs, all from a master craftsman in her native France. It was Pellegrina who had given him as a gift to Abilene on her 7th birthday. And it was Pellegrina who came each night to tuck Abilene into her bed and Edward into his. Will you tell us a story, Pellegrina? Abilene asked her grandmother each night. Not tonight, lady, said Pellegrina. When? Asked Abilene. What night? Soon, said Pellegrina. Soon there will be a story. And then she turned off the light, and Edward and Abilene lay in the dark bedroom. I love you, Edward, Abilene said each night after Pellegrina left. She said those words, and then she waited, almost as if she expected Edward to say something in return. Edward said nothing. He said nothing because, of course, he could not speak. He lay in his small bed next to Abilene's large one. He stared up at the ceiling and listened to the sound of her breath, entering and leaving her body, knowing that soon she would be asleep. Because Edward's eyes were painted on, he could not close them. He was always awake. Sometimes if Abilene would put him into his bed on his side instead of on his back, he could see through the cracks in the curtains and out into the dark night. On clear nights, On clear nights, the stars shone in the pinprick light, comforted Edward in a way that he could not quite understand. Often he stared at the stars all night until the dark finally gave way to dawn. Okay, that's the end of chapter 1. Here's a picture of what chapter 2 looks like. Okay, so you can see a little bit of a picture of what he might look like according to the author. So a couple things about the story so far. There are some main characters. So our characters are Edward Tulane and Abilene, who takes care of him. Pellegrina is the grandmother who got Edward for Abilene. She's the one that paid for him and had somebody make him and bought all of his clothes and his watch that he has. And then also Abilene's parents live with her. But Edward, he doesn't really like adults because he thinks that they're talking down to him like he's a little kid or something, and he really feels that he is very important and shouldn't be spoken to in that manner. So, as the story goes on, there's lots of other characters that come along in the story, and it really is one of my favorite stories, so I hope that you come back and keep listening. I'm going to stop for today, and then I'll pick up with another video with chapter 2. Thanks for listening.